What a day. It's the beginning of Arbiverse. I mean, 2 years ago, people didn't even know what Offchain Labs was.
Yeah, it's the ultimate in decentralization. One person armed with the truth can win out.
Why are L3s compelling to you? And what about Orbit makes it a really good home for L3s?
Yeah, I think L2s can be more nimble than Ethereum.
Nice hat, Ed.
Thanks, yeah.
I think I need one of those.
We can talk after.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. I mean, what a day. It's the beginning of Arbiverse. I mean, 2 years ago, people didn't even know what Offchain Labs was.
Yeah.
Roll-ups were completely new.
Yeah.
And now we've kind of got this like bustling ecosystem of builders, users. How do you feel about that, about the growth overall and just broader reflections?
I mean, it's incredible. When we started the company in 2018, it was just like 3 people in a room. And we had an idea kind of what we wanted to do, but to see it grow into this, the Offchain Labs team, the Arbitrum Foundation, and then this incredible community having events like this, Arbiverse, I would never have imagined this could happen.
Yeah, I think that the Arbitrum ecosystem has gone through like several different evolutions, right? It started as first like the Arbitrum airdrop was a very notable one for being a large airdrop for Ethereum users, and that kind of got this like initial community bootstrapped. Yeah. Then really kind of dominated on DeFi as well, which I still think is very, very prevalent. Gaming, and then now it's just evolved so much. Yeah. How do you kind of conceptualize what Arbitrum is? Like, you've got all these different product suites, and what Offchain Labs kind of is like. How does this come together?
I mean, one thing that's really changed is we started out with a single chain, right? What Arbitrum 1. And that was what it was, right? It was fairly robust. It did the job. But now there's so much more variety, so much more diversity in the ecosystem, so many applications, but also now with Orbit, lots of different chains doing many different things for gaming or for other sectors. So, I think what started as just one piece of technology now really is an ecosystem. There's so many teams that are building within the space and that are, have decided to sort of to commit to being in the Arbitrum space, and as that happens, the community takes on a life of its own. That's one of the things that's really exciting to me is the Arbitrum DAO sort of achieving that escape velocity to where they are really operating as a community, and they're being strategic. You have this really sophisticated conversations going on in the DAO about what the direction should be. It wasn't a given when we started and launched the DAO that it was going to turn into this. But this is kind of what we imagined or hoped it would be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, human coordination at massive scale is very difficult without that kind of top-down hierarchical leadership. And I think we saw this really big emergence of DAOs a couple years ago, and they've kind of somehow like fizzled into the background of crypto today. But I think Arbitrum DAO is a great example of how they still power some of the most important networks in the space, but they've kind of taken this backseat.
Well, I think it differs, actually. I think some DAOs are different, right? One of the things we worked really hard when we sort of envisioned and initially set up this thing before we sort of launched it and set it free. We really thought hard about what we thought would be needed for the DAO to be empowered, right? And that included a bunch of things, but some of those things are technical, right? The way that DAO voting works, where when the DAO votes to do a thing, that thing automatically on-chain happens, right? It's not just a polite request to some multi-sig to please do something, right? The DAO ultimately holds the ultimate control. And that was an important part of it. But then I think, it takes a lot of work for people to sort of foster the growth of that community. But in some ways, it's like, raising a child in the sense that, they become more independent. If you're doing it right, they become more and more independent. And then they reach the point where not only they're adults, but they're actually more capable and impressive than you, which is, of course, the goal that you should have. But that doesn't always happen. It doesn't happen automatically.
Right.
Right. I think from the very beginning, even the mainnet launch of Arbitrum 1, we put a lot of thought into the fair launch concept. Right. This idea that we really wanted to foster a variety of different applications, not just like pick one winner in each area, but to say, we want to have a big tent. We want to welcome everyone in. We want to provide support and a technology that is easier to adopt. So then you get a broader community, and I think that sustains over time.
Yeah, so I understand that you're quite deep into a lot of the research that goes into Arbitrum itself, Arbitrum 1, Orbit, Stylus, multi-VM, kind of the whole lot. And so compounding off this community-oriented discussion, Offchain Labs itself is also pushing forward a lot of research over the last several years and looking ahead. What are some of the most important research breakthroughs or initiatives that you guys are pioneering today to push the future of Arbitrum forward?
I mean, I think the things that are sort of next on the agenda for the DAO to look at, or the DAO has been looking at, are Bold and Timeboost. Okay. Bold is the next-gen proving protocol that allows permissionless validation. Which is really kind of a remarkable thing, that any one user, anywhere in the world, with just a single regular laptop, can force the chain to stay correct and can force it to make progress. So even if everyone else in the world is against you, if you with your laptop can be the hero who makes Arbitrum continue to operate. And that's kind of incredible from the standpoint of decentralization, right? It's the ultimate in decentralization. One person armed with the truth can win out. So that's Bold. And then Timeboost is a mechanism that does a couple things. It's a slight change to the way sequencing works, but the bottom line is that it reduces the amount of spam transactions on the chain, and then it also allows the DAO to capture a bunch of the value of MEV that their chain is generating.
Got it. So on the Bold front, the first point, the core breakthrough there with this honest minority assumption is effectively that as long as there's one good actor that can hold the information about the Arbitrum 1 blockchain on a very easy CPU device, MacBook Pro, then the integrity of Arbitrum 1 itself can be sustained.
Exactly right. You can protect the integrity of the chain, and you can stop and you can cause the chain to actually keep making progress, right, all by yourself.
Okay, and then on the Timeboost proposal, this was more of a breakthrough from the previous way that L2s, specifically Arbitrum 1 and others, were sequenced. Kind of a shift from that first come, first serve model now to almost what is like proposer builder separation on the L2, but not exactly.
Yeah, I think it's a better fit for L2's needs. I mean, L2's and Arbitrum, is one of the pioneers of this. Do the sequencing or block building differently from L1 in a way that is more protective of users. Right. Protects you against front running and sandwiching, for example, and is also very fast. Right, much faster than L1. You have 250 millisecond block time, and that can go down to at least 100 milliseconds. There are Orbit chains that do that. So I think Arbitrum's sequencer has been great in a lot of ways. But the one thing that it didn't do is capture MEV value. And that's something that Timeboost lets you do. And so that's available to the DAO. I know that delegates have been looking carefully at this. There's a lot of discourse around it. And the other thing about sequencing that's currently we've been talking about is a project that we've been doing jointly with Espresso Systems to decentralize the Arbitrum sequencer. So that is basically take the sequencer that you know and love, plus Timeboost, and then make a decentralized version of it so that you don't have to rely on one party to ensure that the chain can make progress efficiently.
So this single sequencer model, which I prefer that term over centralized sequencer model as well. This single sequencer model is highly effective for transaction ordering and for the ability to basically have very fast pre-confirmations and extremely low latency transactions. moving into the next stage of Arbitrum requires, would you say, more censorship resistance, or what would you say is like the big? I know that the anytime that I tweet that I'm like, when will these L2s ever decentralize their sequencer? It always just blows up because people are always like kind of pushing it, but I'm not sure they understand like the core properties needed.
Sure.
Right. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes when people complain about the sequencer being centralized, it stems from not understanding what the sequencer does, right? But based on what you're saying here, that's not you. Right, because they think that the sequencer is responsible for ensuring that the chain is correct and safe. But that's not. We would never trust a single entity to do that, right? The sequencer's job is just to report which transactions arrived and in which order, and to do that accurately, right? It does mean, though, that the sequencer has the power, if it wants to censor you, it can slow down the inclusion of your transactions quite a bit. Or it can somehow discriminate. It can let its friends' transactions in faster or other stuff like that, right? If it misbehaves. And right now the model is there's one sequencer, it's chosen based on community trust and pledges not to cheat in those ways, right? So, but what you would prefer to do, I think, is to have a committee of sequencers and then say, unless there's some pretty big collusion among them to cheat, you have a guarantee that this collective of sequencers will behave like an honest single sequencer, right? And so from a user standpoint, you still send your transaction in, it gets sequenced pretty fast, and you still have good user experience. But it's more robust because there's no one party or even like small group of parties who can cheat or put their thumb on the scale in the sequencing.
Yeah, and I think that the community sentiment, it's good to have the community kind of backstop of always like pushing teams to move to the next stages of decentralization, whether being L2 beat stages or just like the next iterations of kind of like what the best alignment with the core ethos of crypto, why we're building here today, and pushing that forward for teams.
Exactly right. So decentralization, if you're not trying to decentralize, then why are you on a blockchain at all, right? Because that's the big virtue that you get with a blockchain. And the Arbitrum stack and the Arbitrum 1 have been decentralizing progressively. But really, the two pieces of decentralization that are left, I think, at the technical level, are completely permissionless validation, which Bold does, and then decentralizing the sequencer so you get this protection against discrimination by the sequencer.
Got it. So tying back to the Justin Drake Beam Chain L1 improvements at the consensus part, a part of this was technical debt of Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And we talked, and through the presentation, we can understand that through the work from proof of work to proof of stake, there's technical debt accrued, and this also applies to rollups. So I'm just asking you objectively here, do you think Arbitrum has technical debt that needs to be addressed, or is there a route for L2s to address their technical debt periodically to kind of improve as there could be more L1 improvements?
I think any software project has technical debt. Anyone who tells you otherwise has either is lying or has never been in this business, right? And one of the things that's brilliant about technical debt, the analogy to debt, right, is that it kind of makes clear that it is like debt, right? It's not the right policy to never have any debt.
Yeah, it can be paid off.
It can be paid, and that's the thing. You can't get in over your head, number one. Number two, you're going to have to pay it off eventually. And number three, until you pay it off, you're going to, you'll be hampered by interest, which is really kind of the drag that technical debt puts on your ability to do everything, right? And so, it's a process of managing technical debt in the code base and managing technical debt in the protocol. I think L2s can be more nimble than Ethereum. And that's appropriate, right? Ethereum has more at stake, and it is the foundation of security for all the L2s and L3s, and so it ought to be really cautious and move very carefully. L2s can lean forward a little bit more because governance works differently in L2s. I think also you can go more quickly, right? L1 can only change by sort of the emergence of a very strong social consensus. Because every time you do a hard fork in Ethereum, you need to be confident that virtually everyone will follow the fork, right? Whereas in an L2, you can have a DAO vote. You decide, you implement, you move on.
It's done, right?
Right? And it's important to due diligence, right? But you have the benefit of actually reaching a decision. You don't have to debate until, one side decides decides to stop fighting.
Right. Okay, so with that lens in mind of the L1 kind of slowly but potentially changing in the future, this like one of the big reasons that we discussed over the last 24 hours is this interoperability between L2s, and so Arbitrum Orbit has this kind of native interop that's there within all of the Orbit L3s and L2s. Yeah. Similarly, there are other rollup clusters as well. How important is it for the Orbit cluster to you to be able to seamlessly interoperate between other clusters in the Ethereum space? And like, how do you think that's going to happen? Because I have this kind of thesis that we'll see more like coordinated block building or like shared sequencing within clusters in these enshrined zones, and then more like intent-based systems or like transport layers between. So like, what is your mental model of like the importance of that, and then how do you think Orbit cluster will interact with the others?
Yeah, so I tend not to think of Orbit as a single cluster. It's kind of more of a constellation.
Okay.
I think it's important. There are different ways of managing a group of chains, right? One way is to say we're going to have unified governance, we're going to have unified infrastructure, and we're going to operate almost like sort of different branches of the same organization, right? All these different chains. And that's one way you can do it. There are some advantages in the ability to interoperate from doing that. But I think that once sort of the research on cross-chain interop gets more mature, that advantage is really going to dissipate. And the other model, which is more like, kind of more like the internet, where you have these separately managed chains and they're each making their own decisions about when to upgrade and how to configure and all of this, and they can still communicate and interoperate with each other pretty well. And if you can get to that end game, then you can have good interop, even across chains that are very different, that are managed differently, that use different technology stacks and so on. It'll take us a while to get there as a community, partly because we, I think, still don't know what are the best technical ways to manage that. Although that's one of the biggest areas of research we have going on at Offchain Labs, is to understand, try to get a really crisp idea of what we think is the best way to manage cross-chain interop. But I think you'll have something more like the internet, right, where you don't have to have one central, it's not like corporate IT, right? It's more like everyone manages their own stuff, and you figure out the technologies you need to make it work together sort of efficiently and smoothly.
Safe is moving the world's GDP on-chain. With the introduction of SafeNet, Safe is taking this to the next step very soon. Check out net.safe.global to learn more about how Safe is moving the world's GDP on-chain.
Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fraxtal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fraxtal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s, and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fraxtal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fraxtal mainnet, bridge your tokens, and bring your Frax assets into the Fraxtal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fractal, you are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity. Redstone modular oracles are available on 50 plus chains, trusted by over 100 clients and over 6 billion in total value secured. Visit redstone.finance to find out more.
And would you say for Arbitrum, one of those technologies has been this recent breakthrough of the fast withdrawals?
Yeah.
How does that kind of tie into the picture?
Yeah, I mean, fast withdrawals is a feature that's available for chains that use the AnyTrust technology, right? And it lets you do a withdrawal from, say, from an L3 chain down to Arbitrum 1 in about 15 minutes. So even though optimistic rollups have traditionally had a 7-day delay and ZK rollups, hours of delay typically to get to finality, because of, without getting too deep into the weeds, because of the way AnyTrust works, you have available this option to safely confirm or settle L3 results to L2 much faster. And the way that cashes out for users is this fast withdrawals. So that's a piece of it. But that's 15 minutes, right?
Right.
From a user experience standpoint, 15 minutes is way better than 7 days.
For sure.
But we aspire to better than that, right? You want to get to the point where the user doesn't get bored waiting for this to happen, right? And it's a question how fast you can make it. Can you have sub 1 second cross-chain interop that is trustless and doesn't require the chains to be under unified management? I think that's possible. But we have some distance to go to get there. But that's like, for me, at least to me, that's the goal of interop research, right? We don't want to compromise. There's sort of these three things, right? We want independent management, we want it to be super fast and cheap, and we want it to be trustless, right? And I don't think that's a trilemma. I think you can actually get all three.
And that is where we are working towards as a space. Is to
it's where we want to get to.
Right.
But we don't know all the details of how to get there. I think I kind of feel like we can see it from here, but we don't know how to get there yet.
I feel like that is applicable to a lot of different research areas in crypto today.
Yeah.
It feels like it's like just out of arm's length, It's getting closer than ever, which is something to be optimistic about. I also understand that you are, maybe as a contrarian take, but maybe not, is that you are bullish L3s. Or at least you are extremely interested in the development of L3s, where other potentially more monolithic chains will yell at Ethereum and the modular ecosystem as, bro, do you need more layers? L3, L4, L5, L6.
Yeah.
Right, so why are L3s compelling to you? And what about Orbit makes it a really good home for L3s?
Yeah. I think there's a couple reasons why I'm interested in L3s. One is the market is interested in L3s, right? There are a lot of L3s, they do a lot of traffic, right? L3s do pretty close to half of all the traffic in the Ethereum stack is measured by gas. And that is, right? And that's a lot, right? And that surprised me somewhat. I thought we'd see some healthy L3 traffic, but not as much as we have. So that's one reason, right? The market seems to want it. And you can kind of understand why, I think, if you dig into the details around things like cost of operating a chain, right? The big advantage of L3s is that you get to settle to L2 instead of L1. And that helps you two ways. One of your big costs in operating one of these chains is the cost of settlement, which means you're buying gas from your parent chain.
Yeah.
Right? And you'd much rather buy L2 gas than buy L1 gas.
Arbitrum 1 gas is like going to like cheap, Thailand and on your moto versus like your like truck in the States.
Yeah, or like flying first class.
Right? Yeah, on a jet, right.
Yeah. So that's a big plus. And then, also L2s, if you're talking about an L3 on top of Arbitrum 1, which is like the most popular place for L3s to home, Arbitrum 1 has features like Stylus that let you do things, say in cross-chain bridging, or in verifying ZK proofs that you couldn't do on L1.
Yep.
And so for all those reasons, there are advantages to having your parent chain be Arbitrum 1, or in general in L2. There's some drawbacks to being in L3 as well, but I think people must find those advantages compelling.
Yeah.
And so, I think, you can ask, will there be an L4? I I mean, I know
L3s give you enough throughput, no?
L3s give you, yeah, I think L3s give you enough, and sort of getting off Ethereum, which is just a different animal than the L2s, as your parent chain, gives you most of that benefit.
So as we kind of come to a close here, Ed, you hinted at some of the Interop research that you've been doing. What other research has been particularly fascinating to you, whether inside of Arbitrum ecosystem or outside? Sure. What are you seeing that you think has a lot of potential to push the space forward?
Yeah. So we've been focusing a lot on what you can do to make the speed of individual nodes faster. Right? There's a bunch of ideas out there in the ecosystem, and some of them well-formed, some of them more sort of more nascent. But sort of really looking inside, what happens inside a node, and how can we make that faster, number one, and two, make it safe so that we don't in the same way that you can't just increase the gas limit infinitely, because then nodes can't keep up, right? So how can you squeeze more performance out of your chain while still making sure that that home node operator is able to keep up? And so I think there's a ton of fascinating stuff. And as a person who's been interested in computer systems research, kind of what's inside the guts of the way computers work, for my whole career, I find that really interesting. So, I mean, I think that's important.
Sounds like ZK.
ZK is also partly there. I think it's an interesting area.
Yeah.
I think ZK has value, but is overrated in terms of having a chain use all ZK proving, because I think if we were to switch from optimistic to ZK, I think our users wouldn't even notice.
Right.
Except, they wouldn't notice the gas fees were higher.
Yeah.
Because we had to pay for the cost of proving, right? So ZK proving your chain doesn't really pay off much in terms of user experience. That said,
but it is on the roadmap in some capacity.
It is on the roadmap, yeah. Because the reason not to do it yet has to do with cost. Right? And so as that cost comes down, then, and we understand how we would or will incorporate ZK proving into the Arbitrum stack. But the other interesting thing is ZK proving is not just for proving all of the computation of your chain. It's a really important tool in your toolbox as you're designing protocols, and using ZK proving more locally in lots of different places in the protocol. I think there's huge advantages there, and our team is kind of going nuts on identifying opportunities to use ZK to do interesting things.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. And Ed, thank you for the time. I hope you've had a good week so far in Bangkok.
It's been great. Been great to be in Bangkok, and DevCon is always a ton of fun.
A lot of builders, no fluff.
A lot of builders, a lot of fun, serious conversations, and also just a good time.
Yeah.
It's the gathering of the tribe.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks.